Hey guys, welcome back to the Pageant project. I got sent an email message the other day about taking legal action against a director. Now, I won't go into the details about it, obviously, but if you are someone who has had a bad enough pageant experience that you're considering taking legal action, I wanted to give you a few of my thoughts, a few of my own stories of what I've been through. And obviously this is not legal action. This is not legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, a trained lawyer, nor would I want to be. Although I did study a little bit of entertainment law here in Australia and contract law, and I did enjoy that. But this may not just be a contestant against a director, or a contestant against a coach, or a contestant against a contestant. It is possible that it could go the other way as well. A director who might want to take action over defamation, or a coach who might want to take action over defamation. But in this case, it is a contestant who had a negative pageant experience, and then the parent asked me for some advice. Now, what I will say up front, the general rule of thumb when it comes to do I want to take somebody to court, the general rule of thumb is going to be absolutely not. I have had some experience both in pageantry and outside of pageantry with legal cases, and what I can tell you is that the only ones who win either way are the lawyers. It is very tiring, taxing emotionally. You pretty much have to, at least in a case like pageants, you would have to pretty much relive the negative experience because the lawyer needs to know what's going on. It's incredibly expensive. Lawyers, from my experience, it's not uncommon for them to charge you for a phone call and to charge you in something like 5 or 6 minute blocks. I don't know any other profession where you can do that, but that's what happened to me. So it's emotionally taxing, it's incredibly expensive, and at the end of the day, people sometimes think that the law or taking someone to court is about getting justice, or about something that was unfair that happened and trying to make it fair. So they think it's about justice. The blunt answer and the blunt truth, which I know perhaps not many of you will like, is that going to court is about the law. It's not about what's fair. And sometimes the law falls on the side of being fair, and other times I'm sure you've seen legal cases where you were wondering how on earth could that have been the conclusion or the verdict that was handed down that seems wildly unfair. And then you see sometimes the idea of the people's court, where people basically discard the verdict of the legal system because they thought it was unfair. Now, I'm not saying which one is right or wrong. I'm just saying the legal system and what's fair sometimes overlap, but they're not the same thing. The other thing I'm sure you know, and I've only had legal experience here in Australia, but in America, very often, as I said, it's expensive, and the person who wins at the end of the day very often is simply the person who has the deepest pockets, so the one who can afford to keep going the longest. And I can tell you, at least from my experience, you don't want your legal case to be going longer unless you're the lawyer. Again, this is not something that I think any sane person would enjoy doing or enjoy going through, is a legal case. So my general rule of thumb is no. Don't do it. There is an exception, and I'll get to that at the end. But the other thing you have to realize is, just because you got hurt, or you got upset, or someone got bullied, a lot of pageantry is hearsay. There are very few systems, and this is something I've talked about previously. There are actually very few systems that have very clearly written contracts, not verbal contracts, and well-written contracts. I've seen the international title holder's contract from a very big environmental pageant, and I will tell you, it was worded absolutely horrifically. There were spelling mistakes, grammatical mistakes. I won't go into whether I thought it was fair or not, because that doesn't really matter. I mean, if you sign a contract, you sign a contract. But it was written absolutely horrifically. It wasn't written in a, let's say, an English-speaking country, so there's a certain reason for that. But this was before the days of ChatGPT, just before, not long before. But suffice to say, I could very easily have written a better worded contract or a more correct contract using ChatGPT within a couple of seconds. Because very often there's either no contract, or it's a very badly written contract, or it's a director pretending to be a lawyer and trying to use legal language but they're not using correctly. You might say, oh, they don't have a contract, they don't have legal contracts, and so yeah, I can get them, right? They don't have the contract, they didn't deliver what they promised. The problem with that is the exact fact that they don't have a very well written contract. Now, you'd have to ask lawyers about this, but the very fact that they haven't written explicitly what, let's say, the deliverables are if you win, or what the scoring criteria were, or what the rules for eligibility were, the very fact they don't have that written down clearly makes it incredibly hard for you to prove in a court of law, not to your friends, not to your daughter, not to your best, not to your partner, but in a court of law, it's very difficult to prove because there's no actual explicit contract. And courts are not going to be interested in opinion, in hearsay. So if there's any word when you're telling me what happened, or this was unfair, or this person said this and this person said that, you throw all of that out, because this is not a place you go to vent your feelings. This is a place where you have to very objectively prove, okay, I was promised X, Y, Z, and I didn't get it. There should be no mention of whether it's, again, not a lawyer, but at least from my point of view, there's a little mention about what's fair or not, or who the right girl, the rightful winner. That doesn't fly. Again, I hope it doesn't, at least in a court of law. And in the case that, well, I won't go into the case that was brought to me, but I will tell you my own experience of going through a court here in Australia, although it was settled before court, but the lead up was preparing to go to court, and it had nothing to do with pageants. You end up discussing things very often through the lawyer, because you're encouraged not to speak to the person on the other side, which is understandable. I will also say I don't recommend airing any of this out in social media, out in public. The fact that you're considering going to court, or that you're going through, I just think that's a bad idea. I know there's some people in pageants who like to air all this in public, and I think that's a bad look. But we had to communicate through our lawyer, and then there was an offer that was made, and it was done. I never went to court because I didn't want to, because it was going to be, frankly, more expensive to go to court and take longer to maybe get back what? I mean that's a question you have to ask yourself. That's another thing, is, okay, you want to take someone to court because they treated you in a certain way. What do you want from them? And this is another reason why I would say, at least in pageants, no, I don't generally advise taking legal action, because I don't think many people who are thinking that far have actually thought, well, what do I want? So if you win, what do you want? Do you want money? If you want money, how much? Like, do you want $100 or $500, $1,000? Do you want your entry fee back? Do you want them to instate you as the rightful title holder? And then my question is, do you really think that you've taken a director to court, you won, and now you're forcing them to take on the person you want as a title holder? You really think that relationship is going to go well or be a healthy one? No, of course it's not. And so I feel many people, when they throw around this idea of, oh, I'm going to take you to court, I'm going to take legal action, they haven't thought through, okay, but what is it that you want? And at the end of the day, as I said, it's time consuming, it's emotionally draining, it's incredibly expensive. At the end of the day, it's just not worth it. I mean, even let's say if you took the biggest pageant titles in the world, like a Universe, a USA, an America, what have you. I mean, you could argue that yes, if you would have won those massive titles, but you had objective proof that scores were rigged or were incorrect, and objective proof, not hearsay, objective proof, whether that's written, whether that's testimony, whether that is software tracing, software results, the accounting firms some pageants like to use to validate their results. You could argue, okay, in that situation, when there's that much on the line, because those are massive pageants, it may be worth doing it, but then everything I said still stands. It's going to be emotionally draining. It's going to be incredibly expensive, especially, guys, if you take someone bigger to court. One of the things that successful business people or rich people tend to have is a lawyer on speed dial. So you threatening to take them to court probably won't scare them in the same way it would scare someone who is more of a small-time director. So it can be done if you have very objective and undeniable proof, black and white proof, that I was promised X, Y, Z, and I was given something else. Now, the situation, that is the only situation in which I wouldn't say, yes, take legal action. It's the only situation in which I go, okay, maybe we can consider it. Because as I said, my general rule of thumb is no, because it's really not worth it. But the situation that I had here in Australia with a former client of mine, she was served a letter. Now, it's one of those letters that is supposed to, it uses legal language, like legal light language. I don't think it was served by a lawyer. I think it was written by the director using ChatGPT to try and sound like a lawyer. But she was served a letter saying that she was going to be dethroned. Now, this was maybe a month or so before she was due to represent Australia overseas at a very large pageant. And the reasons that she was given in the letter for her dethronement were false, factually false. There were some opinions. For example, if someone says you're hard to work with, like that's hearsay, right? He said, she said. One person can say that one person's hard to work with, another person can say, oh, that person's just decisive and forthright and doesn't take any nonsense. But the factual part of it, where it said that we're dethroning you, and I won't go into the details here, we're dethroning you because you did this, right? That was false. She had not done that at all. It was difficult to prove, not impossible, but it was possible to prove that she hadn't done that. And so the factual reason that this director had given in the letter, dethroning her and not allowing her to represent Australia, they were false. And so in that situation, I didn't say, yes, you should take the director to court. I said, well, if you choose to, you do seem to have, at least to me as a lay person, somewhat of a case, because the letter dethroning you, the reasons for it, are factually false. And so my client took on one of the, at least if I'm understanding correctly, it was a while ago, but she took on a lawyer, and it was a very well-respected lawyer in the field of entertainment. I'm not going to say in pageants, because pageants is not really big enough to have specialist lawyers in it just within pageantry, but it was an entertainment lawyer, so it was someone who understood, let's say, the value of being able to represent Australia in a large international pageant, what that represented, all the work that had gone in to getting that opportunity, and then was very good at Well, put it this way. My client ended up representing Australia at the international pageant and ended up replacing that former director as the new director. So you could say it worked out pretty well. But that all being said, again, I still think that is a fringe case. I think that is the one specific kind of case where I would say, okay, we could consider it. Again, I wouldn't encourage it. I would say consider it. And it still costs money, so she had to have money to pay the lawyer. And the other thing is she had, I would say, the temperament for it. She was a fighter. She was feisty, and she wasn't the sort of woman, I'm talking about my client, she wasn't the sort of young woman to take anything lying down, particularly because she had worked so hard for that chance to represent Australia on the international stage. And so the overall, if you're asking me, again, I got this email from a parent who's watched a lot of my stuff and knows that I'm pretty blunt and honest and have a outsider's view on pageantry. Outside, but not outside, right? Outside enough to be objective. Not so outside that I don't know what I'm talking about. But she asked me, and really my overall advice is going to be, don't do it. I don't think it's worth it. I don't know what you're hoping to get from it. I don't think it will make matters any better. And because she was asking me on behalf of her, I think it was a teenage daughter, I would ask a teenage daughter if she wants to go through it as well, because it's not pretty. And I get that it sucks. I get that it hurts. The horrible things that sometimes can happen in pageants, I get that. But I think sometimes it's a question of you got to learn your lesson, take your licks, and simply move on. I don't like saying that, but it's the practical thing to do. If you're the sort of person who loves drama, who gets very righteous and can't stand injustice, by all means, I'm not saying, you do whatever you want to do, but I think when you ask yourself what's really on the line here, what are the best possible outcomes? How much is it going to cost me in time and money to maybe get those possible outcomes? Don't you think that the simpler answer is just don't do pageants, or do another system, or give it a break, or just something that allows everyone to move on? I will say, when I'm told about people behind the scenes who are conducting themselves with, let's say, very loose ethics and morals, I very often wish that there was something that we could do about it. And I mean, as an industry, and people have often asked me about this idea of having some sort of regulations, or a board of regulations, or board of standards. And the simple answer, guys, is pageantry isn't big enough to have that. And number one, because we are a niche industry, and number two, even if, we could come up with a set of standards, but who is going to sign up for that voluntarily and probably have to pay for it, right? If they are someone who knows they are conducting themselves with very loose ethics and morals, they're not going to sign up to it. And they're never going to sign up to it saying that, no, I'm not signing up to it because I like to behave unethically and immoral. Of course they're not going to say that. They're just going to say something like, oh, it's a bad idea, or I never heard of it. Oh, it's a good idea, but not for us right now. Or, good idea, but I want to see it run by someone else. All to say, at the end of the day, the very people that we'd need to sign up to something like that for it to be effective are going to be the very last people who would ever sign up to it. And so I get it. It's not ideal. It's unfair. I'm not sure there's a solution to it that has crossed my mind. I've thought of a few ideas, such as having a review site. So if you think like almost Pageant Yelp, and having reviews there. But that's been done on Pageant Planet. And the thing is, a lot of coaches, a lot of directors get their girls to go to these sites and leave them good reviews. and then to screenshot them when they've sent positive reviews, and then they get some sort of, I don't know, let's say compensation, maybe not monetary compensation, maybe no compensation other than you better go and leave me a positive review, or I'm not going to work with you and I'm going to blacklist you, because that happens too. So I was thinking of a Pageant Yelp site, but the bottom line is, again, I don't think that works, because we are a niche industry. We simply don't have the numbers. It's not like a restaurant review site where not only do you have a lot more numbers, because everyone in the world goes to restaurants, or at least everyone in the world needs to eat, but also it's accepted that if you have a bad experience at a restaurant, you're allowed to criticize it, leave a bad review, so that other potential customers can be educated about it and then perhaps avoid the restaurant, or vice versa. If you had a really good experience, then people can be encouraged to have an experience at that restaurant. In pageantry, there are a lot of taboos, unspoken taboos, and one of the big problems that we have is that a lot of the time you're just not allowed to say anything. You're not supposed to say anything. And again, I hate that, but if you want to stand up against it, you have to acknowledge that it's not going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of time. You're going to have a lot of people throwing shade at you, and you need to be ready for that. There will be a lot of people who will support you in private, but they'll let you go first, because that's just the way that the industry is at the moment. Whether you're talking about legal action or not, whether you're talking about just, being, what was I say, like making a post about it and revealing what went on behind the scenes. Yeah, I get why you're doing it, but you have to work out whether you're the sort of person who has the temperament for it, and not many people do, because it's extremely confrontational. If you're a young woman, you're going to have grown-up women, maybe grown-up men, DMing you very uncomplimentary things. And at the end of the day, I just think the practicality of what's best for you to have the life that you deserve is simply to move on. If you're going to do a pageant, do a different one. I don't think getting down in the muck and getting caught up in this sort of drama, or trying to sue someone or taking someone to court, I just don't see the cost benefit. I don't see how it's worth it. At the end of the day, I think you're better off moving on. Again, I hate saying that, but that's the reality of, well, I shouldn't say the reality, but that's what I would say from my experience going through the court system here in Australia. One example in pageantry, one without, but also just my experience in the industry. I often, the flack that I cop is most often because I say something that I view to be a self-evident truth. And there are people who don't like it. And that's when I get flack, that's when I get criticism from anonymous accounts and things like that. So that's my opinion. Legal action, my general rule of thumb is, in pageantry, I don't think so. There are fringe cases, I've given you mine, but even then, I think I know it takes money, and the other thing is, I think it takes a certain sort of temperament. But you do your own analysis. Certainly get professional legal advice if you're considering it. And I'm sorry that you have to even consider it in the first place. But guys, if you have any questions, anything, not about legal advice, but anything to do with pageants, send them through to me. You can comment under this video, or send me an email on info@thepageantproject.com, or DM me on my socials. And I'm hoping that you have a week where you don't need to consider taking legal action against your director.